my observation is that it is extremely difficult to create this vibrant ecosystem. What is required is a big success story. And it's kind of counterintuitive. How can you have a big success story without the ecosystem? But somehow it turns out that it is required. And then when you have a big company, big successful technology company, usually about a third of the shares in this company belong to the employees. So what these employees do with millions of dollars they've made, they start seeding new companies. They start leaving this one successful company. They become angel investors. So when we invested in Facebook in 2010, in one transaction we created, I think, a few hundred millionaires. And of course, this capital went straight back into the same ecosystem, usually very close ecosystem, geographically close.
So the ecosystems, they are key to actually achieving this kind of success.
Yeah, so you need the angel community to begin with, people who would probably give $50,000, $100,000 to their friends to go and set up a company. Then on top of that, once that is there, venture funds come in and provide more capital to some of the lucky ones. Then there are growth funds like ours come and provide even more capital. And then, of course, there is this whole institution of mentorship in Silicon Valley, where I live now for a few years, where more experienced managers and founders, they share the experience with the new ones, with the young ones. And this institution of mentorship is very critical also. So this is this combination of various elements which is very difficult to reproduce from scratch.
Sharing with you the learnings that I have had over the last 20 years and the last 18 years with Silicon Valley Bank, where I've traveled the world, invested around the world, raised money around the world, is some of those insights I wanted to share with all of you. Silicon Valley Bank was started in 1983 over a card game. There were some bankers in Silicon Valley who worked for the big banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, who were very frustrated that those banks were not giving any attention to companies that had recently raised capital. The only companies they wanted to spend time with were those companies that had 3 years of profitable operating history. And so there was a real missed opportunity there, and Silicon Valley Bank was born. And 3 years later it went public. It started with just taking deposits and providing accounts receivable financing. When I joined in 1999, there were 500 employees. The market cap was $500 million. There were no international offices. Today, the market cap is $10 billion. There are offices in London, in Dublin, opening one in Berlin, opening one in Toronto. We have offices in Israel, in China, and do business all around the world. And it's a fascinating company because now it's one of the 30th largest banks in the United States with an extremely bright future ahead of it. But I will tell you, along the way, many have shorted the bank. They've lost a lot of money, thankfully. But they always looked at it as an extremely risky business model. How could you lend money to companies when they were losing money for, in many cases, 3-5 years, and many were going to fail? And so part of the secret sauce of Silicon Valley Bank is the network and the relationship and knowing who does what they say they're going to do. And so that is where the bank takes risk based on who the investors are, who the entrepreneurs are. And the risk is that that company will be able to raise another round. And when it raises the next round, the bank typically will take even more, will lend more money, but take less risk through the way that the type of debt that it provides. So interesting story. 2,300 employees, 30,000 companies, and really at the heart of what I do, and my colleague Travis, who's here, where's Travis? What we do and we have done is invest on behalf of limited partners into the innovation economy using the platform of the bank. So some unique insights, obviously unique relationships, a business I started with our CEO 18 years ago.
We have a very strong labor market. We're very technology-driven, and probably the most important thing for this conversation here today is that it's a very export-driven economy. So, by the way, population is about 6 million people, but almost every business that gets started, definitely technology, but not only technology, thinks about going global day one. Okay, so we meet, I don't know, about 1,000 companies every year. None of the companies we meet say anything about the Israeli market. All they talk about is how they're going to dominate US, Europe, Asia, and hopefully the world itself. Mostly it doesn't happen, right? But that's usually their dream. By the way, when you talk about innovation in Israel, there's innovation not only in technology, but in wine, in food, in entertainment. And again, all of it is, I would say, global thinking.
Technology. There's something happening there, and you are showing growth rates in investment that is very different from the trend in the US. What are you doing?
Yeah, nationally, US venture capital is declining. In Ohio, it's gone up 46% over the last 2 years. So Ohio is still a very small ecosystem, but growing significantly. What we've done is essentially bring people together. We believe that collaboration is the key to success in Ohio and in entrepreneurship. I know a couple of people have discussed the importance of a big success story, and while we can't guarantee that, we can facilitate an environment that makes it possible.
We hear a lot about the disregard for borders, or when the digital revolution is coming, we don't need to think about the old borders. But you're actually keen on being in that country, being there for the clients. How important is actually being there?
I think being there is important, but it's almost more important to be connected. And I think we heard earlier people talking around the importance of building strong local ecosystems. And there's a lot that needs to be said about supporting angels and the entrepreneurial community, because they're the people at the grassroots that are talking around ideas and setting up these companies and building these companies. And everyone can't be everywhere, but they can be connected to those hubs, and that's where we're most focused. And Europe's a great example of that for us, because the way how the ecosystem is built in Europe over the last 20 years is very different to the US. People talked 10 years ago around the world is flat, and you can see the world has been flattened, and in terms of the ability to access technologies, the democratization of technology. And what that means is there are innovation ecosystems all over Europe. And it's really important not just that they are strong locally, but they're connected globally, and that's where we're focused.
Australia, I think, is very proud of its economic performance. So, we're saying, I think, that we've had 25 years of continuous economic growth. Now, most people would say that that's an amazing success. But that success is also now causing a lot of weakness and a lot of systemic issues in that how do we actually pivot the economy to take advantage of what comes next?
The exponential innovation over the last 60 years has enabled exponential growth in technology that has enabled new platforms that are unlocking entirely new markets. So as we think about the foundational technologies behind machine learning, mobile, cloud, and the next iteration of platforms that these represent, I'm going to talk about 3 transformational platforms and some of their use cases and practical implications. And then I'll talk about 3 societal needs that are being addressed by technology. In the first and second industrial revolutions, we had over 150 years to adapt. In the meantime, we had civil wars. Due to the economic changes that were happening, we had world wars, we had labor disputes, and ultimately we came up with some solutions around these things. New labor laws, new mandatory education, new international treaties. And yet the change that has occurred in the last 40 years and the change that is going to occur in the next 10 to 20 years will exponentially outpace those periods. And yet we have a fraction of the time to adapt. So it's incumbent on us as those in the technology industry, the public sector, the private sector to come together and essentially reinvent the social contract of how we live together and continue to lift humanity.
How would you describe the company that you are a part of?
It came out of First, thanks for having me. I very much appreciate being here. And like Danny said, I'm learning about Norway as I go, so I might ask some questions back to the audience today if you'll let me. But I had the pleasure of working at Silicon Valley Bank for 15 years with Aaron and a short period of time with Travis. And there were two things that we saw developing in technology and entrepreneurship over the last decade. One was companies were solving step functions of risk earlier on with far less capital. Meaning as a result of distributed computing, AWS, it created an opportunity for entrepreneurs to create a product, deliver it to a customer with far less capital. The second thing that was happening was companies, and Aaron spoke to this earlier, were able to access private capital and stay private longer. So now a company might be 10 to 14 years old before and be a high-performing company and still be private. So what happened along the way is that when these entrepreneurs, either he or she started it when they were 27, 8 years later, they're at $100 million of revenue, growing at 100%, and they have 10 kroner in their checking account.
Not even enough for a coffee.
But their investors are telling them that they own $100 million worth of stock in this company. So we endeavored to build a fund to help those people unlock some of their liquidity, solve to their personal needs as they grow these companies to be those outperforming companies that Aaron ended up putting up on the screen earlier. So that was born of Founder Circle Capital, who invests really in those top 0.5% performing companies. These are companies that are closing in on $100 million of revenue, are growing at greater than 100%, and are just experiencing what we call breakaway growth at scale.